Welcome everyone! Today I'll show you a very instructive game by a very underrated chess player, Swedish Grandmaster Ulf Andersson. Andersson was a top player in the 1970s, 80s and 90s, but he is mostly known as a dry, positional player that drew a lot of games. Not fair in my opinion. It's not like he played for a draw, he just preferred positions that were more simplified and played for a win in those. He's also won a lot of top tournaments and he reached number 4 in the world rankings, so his top status really is hard to dispute. Anyway, this game was played in Reykjavik in 1988 and he played Andrei Sokolov. Andersson had white and opened with knight to f3, d5, d4, knight to f6, c4, e6, the queen's gambit declined, and after knight to c3, bishop to e7, bishop to g5, we have one of the main lines. Black castled, e3, and after knight from b to d7, we have the orthodox variation of the queen's gambit. Rook to c1 was played. White puts a rook on the c-file, which will likely open up later, but this move also prevents black's freeing move knight to e4. Black would like to play this move in order to trade pieces to free up his more cramped position, but now this loses a pawn. White trades on e7, then takes on d5. Knight takes knight, the knight is hanging, so black trades. But after rook takes and e takes d5, there is rook takes c7, so black drops a pawn. Therefore, not knight to e4, but c6. Now rook takes c7 is never an option. Bishop to d3, a6. Black would like to take on c4 and play b5. And here Andersson traded on d5. As I said, Andersson often preferred more simplified, drier positions, but that really suited his style. White more often plays c5. Now there's no d takes c4 either. And then play can continue with e5, pawn takes, knight to e8, and h4, making the game a bit sharper. But Andersson preferred the simpler continuation. He traded. Black took back with the e-pawn. Queen to c2. Now it's like a normal exchange variation of the queen's gambit, except that white played rook to c1 and black played a6. Probably this benefits white more, because black now has a weak b6 square. Rook to e8 was played, castles, knight to f8, packing up the king side, but sometimes the knight goes to e6. Rook from f to e1, bishop to e6, and now Ulf played a3. This plans a minority attack with b4, a4 and b5, which will leave black with a backward c-pawn or an isolated d-pawn. Black played knight to h5, intending to trade pieces. They did trade, and now knight to a4 was played. This is often played in conjunction with the minority attack. White wants to occupy the c5 square, and as you'll notice, black cannot play b6 to chase away the knight anymore, because a6 would be hanging. So that's another disadvantage of black's a6 move. Rook from a to d8, knight to c5, bishop to c8 covering the b-pawn, b4 as planned, and now black went knight to f6. Black could also have played g6, and after a4, knight to g7, and after the pawn trades after b5, ab5, ab5, here black can play bishop to f5. Black can now trade his bad bishop, but his weak pawns still remain a problem. Going back, black played knight to f6, a4 preparing b5, knight to e4 was played, b5, and after ab5, ab5, you can see that black now either ends up with isolated pawns if he takes on b5, or he'll have a backward c-pawn if he allows white to take on c6. Now black went knight to g5. It doesn't really help to take on c5. After queen takes, rook takes, knight to e6, and rook to c2, white still putting pressure on black's weak pawns and just stands better. Going back to knight to g5, here Andersson played the knight back to d2, which is a good prophylactic move. Now he can always play knight to f1 to cover the king. If he had traded knights, then white has traded an important defender of the king, and black can even try to attack himself now. After, let's say, bc6, bc6, and rook to b1, taking the open file, then black can go rook to d6, followed by rook to h6, and black has some play there. No reason to allow any of that, therefore knight to d2. It continued rook to d6, covering c6, but maybe hoping to get active later on. They traded on c6, rook to a1 taking the open file, rook to h6, black does go for some activity, knight to f1 as mentioned, queen to f6, but now knight to g3 was played, which covers f5, and you'll soon see why that matters. Rook to h4, and here Andersson went f4, attacking the knight, which forces a piece trade on e6, and after the knight trade, white will play bishop to f5, also trading bishops, since black bishop could be an important defender of the weak pawns. So that's why knight to g3 was important. And also, after f4, the rook on h4 looks particularly stupid. Knight g to e6, and a knight trade. Bishop to f5 could have been played now, but white instead played rook from a to c1 first, pressuring c6, and after bishop to d7, bishop to b5 was played in this position, and after queen f6, bishop d7, knight d7, here Andersson played a great move, queen to f5. This liquidates to a winning endgame, because black will lose the c-pawn now. And remember, this was all possible after a well-played minority attack and a knight transfer from f1 to g3. Now black played the rook to e6 here. Covering the knight with queen to d6 doesn't help. Now white has knight to h5, threatening to win the rook with g3. And if black now tries g6, then there's a nice little tactic. Queen takes knight, queen takes, knight f6 check, and white will be up a knight. Also not helpful is queen takes queen, because after knight takes rook to g4, the knight then attacks the e-rook, rook to e6, rook takes c6, taking the pawn and defending the knight. And if black tries to be clever with rook takes f4, exploiting the pin, then white wins after rook c8 check, knight f8, rook to b1, and then rook from b to b8 will be played and black is lost. Therefore, rook to e6, blocking out the queen and covering c6, but it doesn't matter. White traded queens, then played rook to c3, covering the pawn to be able to use the other rook, king to f8, rook a1, king to e7, trying to involve the king, but then came rook to a7. Black is completely lost. He played g6, which doesn't do a lot, but what else can black play? Now rook to c7 came. Now rook takes pawn is coming. Rook to e6, basically a nothing move. White won the pawn. Then a rook trade. Knight to f6. But after h3, preventing knight to g4. Knight to h5. White played knight to e2. Planning knight to c3, winning a second pawn, so Sokolov decided to resign. Now a very instructive technical game by Andersson. There are many great ways to play chess. It's not just tactical fireworks and sacrificing pieces. You can also go for a methodical, positional approach, slowly creating weaknesses, not letting your opponent do anything, and Ulf Andersson certainly was an expert in that type of game. Anyway, hopefully you've learned something from this game too. If you like this content, please subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching Chess Student and take care.